So basically, this session is going to be about test-driven development, which is something I started like many years ago, and I actually did another session like 2 weeks ago, which was more focused on .NET Core and more of kind of based on the NuGet, the latest NuGet package that was released by Microsoft, which targets .NET Core, and this is more about basically just getting a basic overview of what this open source framework is, and I'll be just doing a demo more of kind of the server side side of things. So basically, how can we use this to unit test plugins and code activities? So let me just. So that's basically me. Let me actually, let me just stop this session for a bit, because let me just copy and paste this repository that I just made public on GitHub. So in that repo, basically, you can grab these slides and you can have a look at the sample code I'm going to be using throughout this demo. And so basically, in the slides you have also my contact details. If you want to reach out to me, feel free. I'll try to be just watching the chat window to see if there's also any kind of questions. So feel free to pick me with any kind of questions. So this is basically my email address. This is me, which is where I live now in Tarragona, which is like 1 hour drive south from Barcelona, Spain. And yeah, so I've been working basically, if you don't know about me, I was working on COM like since COM version 4. And before that, I was doing a lot of development in .NET and mobile applications and things like that. But basically, my first experience with Dynamics was basically COM 4 and then COM 2011 and then, all the different versions. So this is the session that I did like 2 weeks ago. If you want to go into this repository, you can feel free to check it out, because I did, I think I covered a lot of content on .NET Core. This is going to be this session is going to be more about basically, server-side development. So basically, the first question you might be wondering, why unit testing? Because I think basically it's a key aspect of any DevOps or automation, and this is basically why. So basically, yeah, it's like a joke. It's a funny video, but it's a great summary that you can use to basically get an understanding. In that video, basically, someone got an accident, and then when they tried to fix the accident, actually the car fell away again, which is like a great summary of what could happen in production if you embrace unit testing. Because, for example, if you're in a hurry to fix something in production without automated tests in place, you might be fixing something rather quickly, which you can always deploy rather easily. But if you don't make sure that all the previous tests are still passing, you might actually be introducing another bug in production. So, why unit testing is because we want to be proactive as opposed to be reactive. And unit testing doesn't find any new bugs for us, because we need to still, we need basically testers and developers to find new bugs. But the value is that you can run and those unit tests are part of automated regression testing. So make sure that for every single increment of the code base or any single basically functionality you're trying to deliver, and to make sure that all the previous stuff that we're working for the last couple of years is still working. So basically that's why it's a key part of the DevOps pipeline, because even you can deploy fast, you cannot achieve fast deployments without really test automation as well. And also unit testing is really important, because although you need to cover other areas like integration testing and UI, I like to put basically most of my effort in the unit testing phase, because that's the phase that runs before any of the others. And so basically, because it's closer to the developer, it's easy and to basically fix those issues at that point in time, rather than just waiting for something to get deployed and find out that something is broken in UAT or production. So again, basically brings the issues closer to the developers, to us, where we can rather easily fix those. So what is fake XML easy then? So this is an open source framework that I've always been working on for the last couple of years. It started on like 2014. So it's more than 5 years now. It's open source. It's MIT licensed. That means basically it's a permissive license. You can grab it and use it for commercial or non-commercial projects as well. And it's became quite popular and it's used by many people in many different countries. And it has basically quite a number of contributors already. So that's really nice. That's something I never thought like 5 years ago. So we saw basically why unit testing was important. And the next question is, why should I use this project then? Because at that point in time in 2013 or 14, there wasn't much, people actually were not much interested in unit testing. Or maybe at that point in time, unit testing was something that was so hard or difficult that because of that, there was not actually many developers embracing it. So then basically, and even the few people or the few developers that were trying to do something with unit testing, because they were kind of trying to do that by themselves, those developers were actually kind of repeating some of the same tasks over and over again. So I thought maybe, if I started working on an open source project, which was like a side project at the time, just for fun, and at the same time, just improve something within the Dynamics or Power Platform community, then great. And that's basically where I started. So then what this project basically gives you is that when you do unit testing, really, you need to mock any dependency from your code. Basically, you need to create kind of an abstraction layer, because you need to test your code only without any third-party interactions. Like in the context, for example, of the Power Platform, if you have a CRM Online instance, you want to abstract off basically any network issues, any hard drive failures, any security stuff. When you're unit testing your code, you're just worrying about making sure that code is supposed to do what it's supposed to be doing. So that's why you need to introduce mocks. And then this framework basically gives you the ability that the main entry point of Dynamics, which is the organization service, has those mocks already implemented for you. You have to do that from scratch. And because it has all those mocks implemented, then when you approach unit testing with this project, the tests actually become like data-driven. You don't have to know really anything about unit testing, although it might be useful. But basically, you write your test based on comparing data before the test and after the test is run. So they become more dev-friendly because in order to test with it, you only need to be familiar with the CM SDK mostly, really. And because that data-driven decouples from the mocks that you no longer have to implement, is also easy to refactor. You can just change a bunch of code, run all the tests, make sure everything is okay, but there's not a coupled dependency between the unit test, which mocks, and the code the code that is under test, because it's an open source framework. It's used by many people. It's kind of a consistent approach to unit test and Dynamics or the Power Platform. And again, because that runs in memory, it's way faster than UI tests or integration tests. So basically, that means huge time savings. So feel free to check out those links that I have on this slide if you want to know more about these details. But how does this work, basically? When you develop something with the common data service or the on-prem database, there's basically one main entry point, which is called the iOrganization interface. And the iOrganization interface is like a service you use to talk to the database, the common data service behind the scenes. But basically any kind of extension like plugins, code activities, if you develop client.NET applications, like for example, console apps, .NET Core applications, those things, eventually they talk to the iOrganization service. So the idea behind this is essentially we're replacing the real common data service with a database that runs in memory. So we test our logic based on comparing, what changes have been made to that database. That's kind of the idea. And it has some really nice features, like because you don't have to implement those mocks. All the things like create records, read data, records, update, delete, all the messages you might want, not all the messages, but quite a lot of them in the organization service already implemented. And the most powerful feature that I think it is the query engine, which is basically in the SDK, you've got 4 different kinds of queries: fetch XML, query expression, query by attribute, and link queue. So basically, this handles all those 4 types of queries. And so it's actually translating the query to return the data from the in-memory database, like if you were running that query against a real database, commanded service. So, so this is like how it works, an overview. I won't go into much details, but So basically, let me just jump ahead and do a demo. Any questions so far? No, there are no questions as far as I can see. Okay, so as I said, in 2 weeks ago, I did a demo on .NET Core. Feel free to check it out. This demo is going to be more about basic stuff using server-side unit testing. And let me just actually go ahead and create this from scratch. So let's just say, for example, we had a commanded service. We need to test the following scenario. Say we are a contact center, a call center, and whenever we receive an incoming phone call, we want to track that when that phone call record is created as an activity record in CRM, we want to keep track that which contacts called from which numbers in a period of time. So basically, we have a custom entity already created in commanded service that is called Ultra Phone Call History, that has basically two attributes. One is the link to the phone call, and which will be populated in the regarding object ID, and the link to the contact. So just to give you a high-level overview, I won't go through because I'll be using early bound entities in this demo, and I won't go through the details of generating all the proxy types and early bound entities. I'm assuming you're already familiar with that, but basically, if this visual studio opens up, for this demo, I had basically generated this custom entity, which basically has the, let me show you actually this one, has mainly two attributes: the ultra contact ID, which is the lookup to the contact records, and also the phone number as well. So that's it, basically a custom entity with 2 fields to keep it simple. But I'm going to show you as well some of kind of the practices I use normally when developing server-side code, and how do I organize the code as well. So let me just do it from scratch. And if I have time, and if I don't have the time, then I'll just show the code I had written before. So let me just, okay, let me close this one then. And let's open up a Visual Studio instance. So the first thing, we basically, we can just create a new project. And I'm going to start with this is going to be, so this will be a plugin that will fire on creation of a phone call that will create basically an associated record of that phone call history in the database. So this will be a class library, which won't be .NET standard, will be the .NET framework. I'm going to create a new one. Yeah, and let me store it somewhere, on this PC. Let's actually create a new folder, test. Yeah. And this will be basically DevOps sample solution. Yeah. DevOps actually plugins, yeah, because we're creating a plugins project. So if I create these ones now. So we got basically, this very simple class library, because in the end, all the plugins are really class libraries. We're going to install the same SDK from NuGet, which is this one. We need, because this run inside the server-side pipeline, we just really need to install the core assembly. So let me just go up and install this NuGet package by Microsoft, which just provides us with the SDK. So this now has been installed. And the other thing I'm going to add is also its associated unit test project. So if I filter by unit test project, which by default comes with MS Test, we are almost only installed immediately. So let me just drop this into this folder, and it will be called, I always normally use this convention of giving the unit test project the same name as the project you're testing with an extra dot unit tests if that's for unit testing, or integration test is for integration testing. So let me just create this one. Okay, so I got the unit test project, and this comes by default with a, you can see MS Test, which I prefer to use XUnit, to be honest, because it runs much faster. And now you can use MS Test to run .NET Core as well, but in the past, previously, you could use only XUnit. So let me just remove that class library by default, and if you go to manage NuGet packages, and you can see basically MS Test was installed by default, which I'm going to install because I want to use XUnit instead. Install, yeah. So I'm going to basically manage NuGet packages and then install XUnit instead. XUnit, install. And this basically project will install all the necessary stuff that you need to discover unit tests, but you need to actually install the runner to be able to see the tests from Visual Studio. So we need to install also this XUnit runner, Visual Studio as well. Yeah, install. Okay. Okay, so fine. Let me remove this class, actually. And okay, we have basically this basic setup, which is mostly what I've used for like plugins or code activities. Normally in a solution that if you have several projects that are related to each other, I also have in the same solution plugins and code activities, but that really depends on the project and the size. The other thing I'm going to do is also add a shared project. And this is because shared project. Let me just search by this. Share project, yeah. And I'm gonna put it into the root folder as well. And this is going to be, using kind of the same naming conventions. So it's going to be DevOps sample shared. The reason I'm creating this shared project is because when you're using early bound entities, if you have the reference to an external DLL within this plugins project, then that's an external DLL. You need to basically either ILmerge, which is not yet supported, or do other things. But if you're using a shared project, then the early bound types that were generated using CSBC util, those types are actually part of the same assembly. So you don't have to ILmerge or do anything like that. Normally, this is what I use for like projects that sit within the same repo. But if you have projects that, for example, is a dependency you might reuse from other repositories, then rather than using shared project, I'd be using basically a private NuGet feed. So you basically essentially put, rather basically consuming the shared project, you would be consuming a NuGet package, which is installed as a source NuGet package. So also the source code files are also part of the same assembly. So it won't introduce an external dependency. But to keep it simple, basically, I'm using this shared project. So let me just go ahead and open up the other, just to make it simple, the rebound entities that I had previously generated before. Let me just copy these guys and open up this project folder, and yeah, copy and paste those into here, and then include these files. Include in project, yeah. So these basically files, even though they're part of the shared project, the output of the shared project is not an assembly. It's like a link, it's like embedded into the project that I'm consuming that are linked to that shared project. So from the plugins project, I'm going to add a reference to that shared project now, this one, yeah. And I'm going to add a reference as well from the unit test project to that DevOps sample plugins project as well. That means basically I want, oh, not this one, no. This one, plugins, yeah. So basically this unit test project will be in charge of testing, this DevOps sample that plugins project assembly, yeah. And let me see, basically this is building so far. Yeah, so at this point I didn't use any, I didn't use fake XRMAC yet, so I'm going to be going ahead and install it, which you can grab it from NuGet as well. And because this is, a online instance, I'm going to use this fake XRMAC.9, which is the latest version. But the same project can work for like on-prem. For example, I'm still using mostly on a daily basis for on-prem projects using 8.2, and you can use it for other versions as well. So let me just go ahead and pick this one and install it. So this will actually pull automatically the the XRM tooling core assemblies as well. So it essentially will install the CM SDK. Yeah, it's taking some time, and the first time you're installing it. And yeah, and then basically once this is installed, you need to accept the license, which is MIT license again. This will, at the end of the installation, this will open up this one PowerShell script in Visual Studio that will open up this get started page, which is basically a website you can use to browse, and you have sample code about basically how to test the plugin, how to test the code activity, and things like that, and some comments as well. This is nice to get started if you had no idea previously, but if you go into the GitHub repo, there's thousands of samples because the project is also well unit tested itself. So let me just close this one. And so this is installed now, and let me just add a plugin. So just going back to the scenario, the plugin will run on create of a phone call, and it will create basically a record of a custom entity to keep track of that phone call for each specific contact. So let me just go ahead and create a new plugin. So let me add a new class, and then let me just use this name like so phone call create plugin. And this is a plugin that it will implement, the iPlugin interface, which you can install. You can install the reference here. One of the things I like to do as well is I'm removing all the images I'm using, because otherwise SonarQube will start complaining. And also implement the interface, which basically has a single execute method. Now, let me also go back to this previous sample and just grab the the boilerplate code that I need to get the organization service instance, like this one. Let me actually just open up in Notepad. Yeah, I just want to grab this one. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So basically, these are the methods you normally typically use on every single plugin to get the reference to the organization service. This is the organization service I was telling you before at the beginning of the session, and this is basically the organization service that FakeXOM mocks for us. So once we have this set up in place, we can go to the unit test project and then add a new class, which will contain all the unit test projects, all the unit tests. Sorry. So let me. Again, I'm using, to find things easily, I'm using naming conventions. So if that plugin was called phone create plugin, then the tests where you will find the file basically where you will find the unit tests for that specific plugin will be in this class, like this one. So phone call, the exact same name as the plugin, phone call create plugin tests. Same naming convention. Again, remove the necessary usings, and this will be a public class, so we can find the the tests. And now we can start adding tests. So let's import the XUnit, and let me add so basically two scenarios. Say when plugin runs on created phone call, you should create a phone call history record for that contact and phone number. And at the same time, we don't want to keep duplicates for those records, because we just need to know if that phone number basically changed in the history for that contact. So let me just public void should, for example, create a phone call history record. And so we are doing test driven. I'm starting with the test first before the plugin is implemented. And what I usually do is something like this. You start failing because you're thinking about the scenarios before actually implementing the logic. And so the other scenario will be, so this is the case where we want to create the phone call history record, and there will be another scenario where the same plugin should not create a phone call history record for the same contact and phone number. There you go. So if I run this from the test explorer window, I would see now two failing tests. There you go. These are the two failing tests. And now it's our mission to basically implement the logic in the plugin that will make those tests succeed. So, but before actually going into implementing the logic in the plugin, let me just show you how, for example, I am organizing the code and the test, and specifically the test data. So in this case, we need to we're going to, because the same fake XRM context organization service are going to be used across all these tests. Let me just define. Actually, I can make this private read-only XRM fake context. This property basically contains the database from the command service per se, but in memory. So every time I execute a service.create or service.update against this context, it will keep that record in memory, and you can basically then query that record afterwards to see if the plugin logic in this case works fine or not. So this is the context, and also because I need a phone call record, I'm going to add as well another phone call record, like this one, phone call. And also I'm going to add a contact as well, contact. And yeah, I have these properties in the context. And so in the constructor, basically, of this test class, what I'm going to do is, in the first place, create an instance of that fake context. So basically, this is saying, oh, we're going to use this instance of that database in memory. And we're going to define or initialize a phone call record that will be passed into the plugin as a target. So this will be a new phone call. And because, yeah, for every data you pass into the context, it needs to have a primary key, because that's what basically command service behaves. Every single record has an ID, a primary key. So I'm going to do the same for the contact, new contact, like this one. And I'm going to add a new grid. Sorry. Yeah, there you go. And okay, so the idea is by having these properties into as properties in the class, then I can reuse all these records across the unit tests that belong to kind of the same scenario. So say, for example, when this test runs, because it should create a phone call history record at the end, what I need to double check is that the context that I was initializing before, let me actually, it should create a phone call history record. So that means, phone call history record. There's a method basically I can use to create queries against the context. So, so if I check something like this, ultra phone call history, first of default, if I do this, not null, phone call history, I basically changed rather quickly the unit test to actually, implement the assertion. So normally in a unit test, you start with a range, which is all the setup you need to do before you are actually able to test the system under test. And the system under test in this case is a single plugin. Then you have the act phase, which is when you actually run the logic, and you have the assertion phase. So this is basically the last phase, and I always usually start like this because, when based on business requirements, what should happen is that this logic should create a phone call history record, and this is what really should happen, that there should be one phone call history record created after this has run. So, okay, let me just, I don't like to use comments, but just so you know, because comments get out of date rather easily. And so then, if I run this is obviously still failing because there's no logic yet to create anything, I'm starting with the test in the first place. So obviously this is still failing. So what I need to do is then execute my plugin. Execute plugin with, and this plugin will be the phone call create plugin. And with a target, and the target, because this runs on create of the phone call record, this will be the phone call entity. So now I've basically implemented the act phase. The act phase is when you actually run the logic. Sorry, because this is basically this method. Yeah, sorry, with target. So yeah, so basically this is the step that actually executing the plugin. This is the step where I'm making sure the plugin creates that record. And now let's go ahead and actually implement that plugin logic, because for this specific scenario, the plugin doesn't need any data to check other than basically the phone call that is passed into the plugin. So if I go into the plugin code, and if I go to definition, then this plugin then would receive the phone call in the as a target in the input parameters. So that means basically, typically we find this on many different plugins, but basically if the context dot plugin context dot input parameters, input parameters contains target, and you can even add an extension method to avoid doing this every single time, but to keep it simple, and also if the context dot input parameters target is entity, then we can cast to an nail-bound entity by using something like this as entity, and then we can do to entity and pass the specific type phone call. This is really a phone call record. Why I'm casting to an entity? Because this is basically using early bound, and when you use early bound, fake XRM is able to identify things like missing fields, that when you query data using even fetch XML, which are plain string queries, that it matches the types. Lots of different things you can find while you're unit testing before actually deployment. So I encourage you to use early bound if you want, and if you can use it. So now basically, as you can see, this is a specific early bound. It's using a solely type phone call record. And So actually, one question. Hey, Jordi, any advice on managing mock data with multiple different entity references? Yes. Basically, I'm going to actually show you how this works in this demo. So basically, so now we have basically this strongly typed record created, and we need to create a phone call history record. So let's do it. Let's execute service.create. And as simple as new ultra phone call history, and we just need to pass, for example, actually, let's do this only. So if I run this, if I go back to the test, then this is succeeding now because it's creating a phone call history record at this point. And we can add extra validations. Like for example, we can double check that it didn't just create the phone call history record, but also that the phone call history is linked to that specific phone call and contact ID. So let me just say, so for example, if the phone call was created against a specific contact, and this is where I'm showing you how to link data, that phone call, for example, say had basically you had in the regarding object ID the contact record in that case, then you can link to that phone call record to the contact if you put actually the contact before that one. And then you just say contact, then to entity reference. This is a way of saying, oh, this phone call is actually associated with that contact in the regarding object ID field. And not just that, we can say that that phone call, for example, came with a specific phone number, like, for example, 365 Saturday 000. And yeah, this is basically how you link data in the setup. So if the data had to exist for the purpose of this plugin, then you would call a specific method in the context called initialize, which is not the case because for testing that, because the plugin runs on created phone call, then there's no need to have any test data before. We're just assuming we're testing with the target entity only. But now, if I'm doing this, then the target entity is receiving those properties. Actually, if I had basically add a breakpoint, which is the cool thing, and I can just debug this locally before deployment, you would see that that phone call record is actually, contains the phone number I was setting up previously, and also that the regarding object ID is an entity reference that belongs to that contact, So now I could add extra validations as part of the same plugin. So I could say, that it didn't just create a phone call history record, but also that, that the phone call history should actually contain the exact same number as the phone call that originated this plugin. So I could do, because I could still reference the test data and say that the expected value is the one of the phone call, and that the phone call history record dot I think it's called user phone number, and this is why early bound strong type is useful because you have IntelliSense matches also that phone number as well, and I can just go immediately run this logic and make sure that's the case, which for now it will be, I think, will fail because I didn't add it to the plugin yet. So if I go back to the plugin and I populate this one, say this would be then the ultra phone number is populated with the one from the phone call phone number. I can just now run this immediately after, and I can see that the changes are just working almost immediately. I could keep adding validations, but you get the idea so far. Now let's move on to the next scenario because I only have like 15 minutes. And say in the case where the plugin, for example, fires again for the same contact and phone number, then in that case we don't want to create a duplicate because we want to just keep kind of the distinct combination of context and phone numbers. So in that case, and this is when you have this set up in place, these variations on the scenarios are kind of very similar. So you can normally just, the good thing is that you can almost copy and paste the previous scenario into another into the next test. So the only difference is that whenever this runs is that let me just change this query now because I need to make sure that only one record is created and not just that the first one matches the data. So let me just change this one to something like phone call history list, and then this will be a to list. And then in this scenario, I want to make sure that there's only a single phone call history in that list, So how can we reproduce this? Now, this is slightly different to the previous scenario because in this scenario, when the plugin runs, there was a phone call history record already in the system. So we need to simulate that data that was existing previously. So let me just do it here, for example. Let's actually create another record, and I'll give it a name like existing phone call history record. Sorry, or just phone call history, yeah. This will be a new ultra. Let me just go rather quick. New quit basically, and this would be, this phone call history will be actually linked to the very same contact, the same contact I had in the test data previously to enter the reference, and it will have the exact same phone number because we want to double check this where it doesn't create duplicates. Sorry. Then this phone number will be the same as the same as the phone number from the test data from this one. Yeah, this very same data. Again, I'm reusing the same test data across many different tests because when you're testing a plugin, normally the test data doesn't change that much, and you only need to set up the minimum set of records to be able to unit test the plugin. Nothing else. You need to initialize 1,000 records. Only the minimum set of data you need to unit test the plugin. But by just organizing the data like this, then most of the records basically are reused across the different unit tests. So now, basically, existing phone call history has been created. So how do I tell FakeX or MVC that that record already exists? So basically, there's a method called initialize, where it can pass a list of entities or it can pass a single entity. Let me just pass this one into the context, and then basically, this is basically essentially saying, we had an existing phone call history in the database before the plugin runs. So what I've implemented here is basically the arrange step. As part of the three phases of unit testing. This is arrange step. This again would be the act step where the plugin logic runs, and this would be the assertion phase again. So let me remove these ones, and then if I run this, because the plugin is blindly creating records without checking that there was a record already existing, it will create a duplicate. So this will be false, which still be failing. So now basically we need to go back and implement the logic so that this new case also works. And the beauty about this is that we are not just checking that this new scenario also works, but also all the previous ones are also still working properly. So if I go to the create plugin, the only thing I'm going to do is just do a query before the create. So let's do something like this, XML service context, and I'm passing this service. I'm using LinkQ, but you can choose, fetch.xml, query expressions, etc. I'm just so used to LinkQ. I just prefer this one many times. So let's say we're going to actually execute a query to check if that record previously existed or not. So let me just call it existing phone call history again. And that's basically from the list of phone history ph in context dot, and then this would be the list of entities, and then where basically, the regarding object, the I think I'm missing link queue. Yes. Yeah, I'm missing link queue. System.link queue. There you go. Where basically the contact ID.id equals that one of the phone call. Phone call dot regarding object ID. And also another where clause where basically the ultra phone number equals the phone call dot phone number, and then select, and then select first one, yeah. And once I do this, basically I'm just doing a query to make sure that there was no previous phone call history record created against the same contact and phone number. So only if there was no previous record, so that's the same thing as saying if this is null because it doesn't exist, then is when I create this one. And if I go back to the test explorer and run this code again, you can see I'm making quite a lot of changes with the confidence of actually not just implementing the new functionality, the new case, but also making sure that the previous logic wasn't broken. And I did all of this just before even deploying to the target environment, and without even being connected to CDS. It runs everything locally. And so basically, it's only 10 minutes left. I think I'll leave some time for basically some questions. But basically, let me just go and recap. This was basically a very simple scenario about testing testing some logic that runs on create of the phone call record plugin. And basically, only if you need to some test data set up, then you need to use this initialize method. Otherwise, basically, you just are good to go with running the logic on the test, the system on the test, and that's it. And that's it. Any questions so far?
Wow, what can I say, Jordi? I think we're all amazed. We're really, one of the comments that was left was that this is the best test-driven development session they've ever seen. Full stop. Yeah.
Nice.
So, we're really impressed. It was very elaborate and concise. You covered all the important artifacts to understand how it's all glued and strung together. Now, there is a question, Jordi. There's a question from Squirrel CRM saying, hey, Jordi, any advice on managing mocked data with multiple different entity references, several lookups, etc., that are validated within the plugins themselves on, say, pre-validate or pre-create? We found this to be one of the more difficult aspects in large environments where each unit test can require mocking a load of different entities.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I partially maybe covered that one already, but basically, when you're unit testing the plugin, really, the unit testing, you need to set up only the test data. Like I'm using code like this. Some people use maybe, I don't know if that's a general practice, but some people maybe have some test data in a JSON file. I don't encourage that because in the first place, when you're reading the test data from a file, it basically hits the disk, and that basically makes all the tests much more slower. Also, when you have test data in files, then there's no way you can refactor. For example, if there was a typo in here, or I could just rather easily and go into the into this property and then just do rename, and automatically builds and runs like it was running before. So really, the way you approach testing data is very much like this. For lookups, you use the 20 reference. So basically, this is like saying phone call, the rewarding object ID is linked to this specific contact entity, which let me just rename it back to what it was. And so yeah, that's it. If we have many-to-many entities, then you can, when you run the same SBC util, you can generate also the intersect entity, and then that's just another example where you would just have basically two lookups then instead. But really, it's the same idea. Normally, I've worked on this many years. I didn't never had at least a test class where I had to add more than 10 records per se. So I think it's not a big deal. And if you need more than 10 records, probably that's a hint where you can just break down the logic a little bit more, I'd say.
Great stuff. Great stuff, Jordi. So one of the questions from Philip is, how can I check the org service has only had one update operation during the test? Read, update, create, delete, etc.
Yeah, so one way of doing it is basically you can check, for example, if there was only one record created. You can do it like this. In this case, I'm making sure that there was only one single record created against, the same pair of contract ID and phone number. But if you want, because fake XRM is also built on top of fake EDC, you could do, in this case, because I was running logic against the plugin directly, but fake XRM easy provides a way of saying, let me just show you actually. Organization service, service, there you go. And so the beauty of this is that the context provides a reference to the organization service. If you call this method like this, that has, and you can basically inject this dependency in pretty much everywhere. Like I use that for web applications, console applications, things like that. Even in integrations, for example, with Service Bus, you can inject that dependency, and this mock really has all the methods implemented, but it's a layer on top of fake EDC, which is used behind the scenes. So you could do something still, like you can even do. If you want to actually, for example, make sure that the update message was called only 3 times, for example, which is I guess that's what you pretend to do, then you can still use fake it easy, behind the scenes. So you could do like things like service that, for example, when I call update with a specific, entity, then that it must have happened, let me just actually add a new one just so it compiles. You can do must have happened, and then you can say, this is a way of saying the service, the organization service, what was called with exactly what was the update, method of this service was called, but you can go even further than that and say it was called repeated twice or less, twice or more times. And there's also another overload, which I don't seem to find right now, but I think it was called repeated. Anyway, you can pass in a parameter to say, the update method was called exactly this number of times, and also with these exam parameters, if you wanted to do that as well. That's something I don't usually do because I'm just happy with testing that the comparing data before the test and after the test, really. But yeah, that's a good question.
Great stuff. I think there was one other question. By the way, Philip says thanks. That's perfect. Cool. So there was another question, I think, with by one person who's struggling to write a unit test, but I think it may be wiser to submit that as a because it is a bit more complex. So I think, yeah. So I think what we've advised for Govi to do is his challenge with the query he's having a problem with. He's having a problem with running a test for removing user records from a team. But maybe it's to do, obviously it's probably going to be a bit more complex to answer on this session. So again, Prabhu, please feel free to use the forum, the community forum, GitHub community as well, to drop that in, and maybe we can help you there. But yes, so anyway, look, there's been lots of questions, lots of great feedback. Jordi, do you have any final words? We've got one minute left. So do you have any final recommendations on how the community can keep up to date with what you're doing, with how to get started and learn more?
Yeah, of course. So they can, for example, they can just go to my website, for example, and you will find all the basic. If you never worked with this before, there's some basic examples to start with. But then once you have seen all these examples, maybe you have extra questions, and then the place to go is probably the GitHub repo itself. So this is on GitHub, fake easy. And if you go to this project on GitHub, this has more than 4,000 unit tests. So you can go to the test.shared folder, and there's many different examples. Also, by the way, I'm recording a training course. So if you want to know more about this, feel free to,
yes.
Feel free to basically submit, register on this survey, and just to know basically a little bit more of what's coming. But yeah, you can start with the GitHub repo first, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, so we were hoping for you to tell us more about this new training course, really. So you've got a forms link there, so it'll be nice if we just put that in the chat window for everyone to have access to.
Yeah, sure.
And yes, so if you complete that form, Jordi, you mentioned there may be some prizes. So I've shared a link as well.
Okay.
If you potentially want to win that course, I've shared a survey link. Let me share it now. So Jordi shared his survey link there. I'm also sharing one here. So there are opportunities to win prizes, including a training course with Jordi, as well as some other prizes, Star Wars Lego and some other Microsoft swag, for those who complete the survey. So please, Jordi's survey there, make sure you complete it. And we've also provided another survey there for everyone. So yes, we want to get your feedback on the sessions today. There's been lots of fantastic sessions today. Really impressive. I think everyone is really happy with the sessions that have been covered today. And we're only halfway through. So we want to award prizes to the speakers. We want to give you prizes. Lots of things happening for the community. So again, I personally feel a lot of gratitude towards Philip's saying there's a permissions error. No problems, Philip, I will take a look at that. I personally feel a lot of gratitude towards Jordi. He has definitely played a vital role in the community, especially around test-driven development, but also generally in the D365 Saturday community. He's played a massive role. So yes, Jordi, we all want to thank you so much for the journeys of all the Dynamics developers across the world. We all thank you for your contributions, and we really look forward to your course as well.
Thank you. That's really appreciated, Ross. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.